Phillip. So in this video, we're going to talk about Moira Buffini's play, Dinner. Now, if you've watched some of my earlier videos about Moira Buffini plays, you'll know she's one of my absolute favorite playwrights. And Dinner is no exception. This is, I think, a really, really brilliant play. As the title might suggest, it is set at a dinner party. And so in this way, it follows this very expansive tradition for contemporary drama. Plays like Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf being one of the most famous. Yasmina Reza's play, God of Carnage, is another dinner play. So we've got a smallish cast here, but actually fairly large for a dinner party play. And again, Moira Buffini is in the genre of theatrical monsterism, one of my favorite genres. We've got a cast of 7. So that's not huge necessarily by the standards of a play in general, but for a dinner party play, which often has maybe 4 characters, 5 characters, it's a decently sized cast. But the thing about Dinner that really locates this within monsterism is this is a play of big ideas. And I've talked about this before with other of Buffini's plays, even where she has a comparatively small cast and we don't have, say, large-scale sets or things like this, we still have big ideas under discussion, and that's definitely a component of monsterism as a genre. So, the thing that I find really cool about this play is how pervasively sinister it is. So, the dinner party is being given by Paige, who's a socialite, sort of upper class, doesn't really do much of anything. She seems primarily just to be sort of wealthy, sort of, I don't know, like 20s style, just a person who is wealthy. Like, that is what she does. She's married to Lars, who had been a city trader, and then he turned back to philosophy, and he's just released a book. And so this dinner party is in honor of that book. And with the book, we have the first of several discussions about the nature of art, the nature of aesthetics, which sort of are threaded throughout this play. Because we get Winnie, who's the first guest to arrive. She is an artist. She seems to be one of these sort of conceptual artists who has a sort of postmodern approach, maybe performance art, but also a lot of like spiritualism and things like this incorporated in it. There's something very new agey about her. And from Winnie, we get our first sort of understanding of what this book of Lars is actually about. Basically, it's this sort of philosophy, a sort of post-morality philosophy in which you get sort of the influence of Nietzsche, the influence of the existentialists, even the influence of nihilism. And basically the idea is you can achieve anything that you want simply by pursuing it sufficiently. So, it's as a philosophy, it seems pretty thin, but it's also one of those philosophies where, like, the thinness of it as an actual critical thought may belie the effectiveness of it in terms of selling books. So, there's that. So we get this element. This this gushing praise from Winnie over the life-changing philosophy in this book. So this is our first sort of discussion of aesthetics. It's also linked to, or that element of it is also linked to the suggestion of some sort of affair between Winnie and Lars. We know that we find out very late in the play that early on in their relationship, during their college days, they had slept together. What's going on now is a little bit harder to parse necessarily, because a lot of things happen in the play and a lot of things are sort of contradictory. It depends on what we take seriously, etc., etc. So if you were to perform Dinner, I think there's a lot of ways you could approach this, the interpersonal relationships in this play, that would make it very, very interesting. But I wanted to talk about the sinisterness of it, because again, this is something that's sort of pervasive. Like a play like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, we continually have interpersonal tension between the couples. The couples primarily, but sometimes across couples. So Lars and Paige are continually, sometimes subtly and sometimes more overtly, at each other's throats. We also get Hal and Sean. Hal is a microbiologist. Sean is a newsreader. They show up a little bit later. They are frequently at odds with one another as well. But one of the first things... Oh, the other person who's around that I should tell you about is the waiter. For almost the entire play, the waiter does not speak. He simply serves. But when Hal and Sean arrive, Hal gives us this moment of foreshadowing. Because he says here, do you know there was a moment when it's an extraordinarily foggy night, so that's important. They've had a lot of trouble finding the driveway. And he says, do you know, there was a moment when I thought this is getting really Stephen King, as if any minute Jack Nicholson was going to appear. Then he laughs an insane laugh, with a big blood-splattered axe, and then the windscreen would shatter, and he throttles himself. Curtains. It's really spooky out there. More than spooky. Uber spooky. So this is our first indication that something is going on here. There is a depth beyond what we have on the surface. We don't know what that is yet. But as Paige sort of continues orienting the evening, we start to maybe get suspicious, if we're clever. And at one point, Paige does say here, so she has hired this waiter online, and she says, you can find anything you want on the internet, from plumbers and hired assassins, right through to Siamese twin prostitutes who'll dance naked in front of your friends. Hired assassins is an interesting reference to stick in there. Keep that in the back of your mind. Going forward, stuff happens, dinner party tension, interpersonal conflict, etc., etc. Then, a guy shows up at the door named Mike. He has crashed his van in front of their house, and he wants to use their phone in order to call a tow truck. Lars does not want him to stay. Paige insists... Well, so interesting. So, initially, Paige doesn't want him to stay. Paige's first response to this is, waiter, show him the door. But Lars initially wants Mike to stay, and there's a fairly heated debate about this, with Lars telling the waiter to take his coat, and Paige very pointedly says to the waiter, remember what you're here for and be very, very careful what you do. Interesting. So we go forward. Mike is actually an interesting character. He tells the assembled group that he is a thief and he's just robbed the place next door, etc., etc. He's got all the old woman in the next house over his valuables in the back of his truck, and everybody's just like really thrilled with this idea, and everybody's like asking him how good a criminal they would make, and so on and so on. So we have this whole bit. Then the main course, so the food is bizarre, to say the least, but it's interesting. And the food is again connected to these sets of big ideas. The soup course is a living soup, basically. Like it involves algae that's been kept cooked over several days at an extremely low temperature, yeast added. So algae and yeast have been growing in the soup, etc., etc. It's this sort of primordial thing. So again, this is food as art, and that's one of the elements of the aesthetic here. Winnie, who's a vegetarian, for the main course is served a raw Savoy cabbage, and basically what Paige says in terms of why this was a raw, or actually technically a partially frozen cabbage, she says, I wanted something special for you, knowing that you're an artist. If you'll notice, I've had the cabbage in the freezer to simulate the winter frost it naturally endures. It'll melt into diamonds of dew, which the leaves will cradle in their melancholy folds. It's a culinary poem. I felt that to cook it, indeed to prepare it in any way, would be to spoil it. So as an artist, enjoy. So again, this is one of the big ideas of this play, is the nature of aesthetics, how art works. Similarly, for the main set of guests who are not vegetarians, Paige has a distinct entree. Live lobsters that are brought in. And she tells them in the kitchen there is a boiling pot of water. You can go and you can dunk your lobster in. You can hear its death cry, and then you can eat. Or in the back, there's a pond that has been filled with basically salt water to the natural salinity a lobster requires. You can allow your lobster to live, and you go hungry. And what she explains, she says here, there was this is a review of Lars's book, I think it was in the Hairdresser's Journal, that says, Lars Jensen obviously thinks he's God. So with this dish, I thought we could all imagine we were Lars and be God. There is the lobster, soft and naked beneath its defenses, as helpless as mankind, awaiting its final fate. So there's a pot of boiling water in the kitchen and an ornamental pond out there on the patio, which I've had the waiter fill with brine. If you want your lobster to live, take it out and release it to its natural element. If you want to consume it, take it into the kitchen, put it face first into the boiling water, listen to it scream, and when it's cooked, the waiter will bring it in for you. You can crack it open, remove its stomach sacs and intestines, and eat it with the attractive salad. That way lies lobster apocalypse, and that way lies salvation. The choice, ye gods, is yours. Most of the characters choose not to kill their lobsters. Sean does kill hers. Everybody else does not, except for Paige, because Paige says, this lobster reminds me of me, which is why she has to go into the fiery pot. Striking. And again, another thing for that back of your mind folder. So we go forward. Tensions rise, tensions rise, tensions rise. And again, like so many other great dinner plays where tensions rise continually, this is done masterfully. At some point they play a game where Paige has put cards under each of their side plates, and they have to discourse for 2 minutes about the topic that they've been given. The first one is Sean, who was given the topic murder weapons, and we get at least a 2-minute, if not longer than 2-minute, just list of all the things you can potentially kill a person with. It's literally, it starts at the bottom of page 68 in this edition, and it goes through the top of 72. So we have about 4 pages of just, there's no other dialogue. It's just, here are different things you could kill someone with. So, I mean, Sean starts out with a lance, a cudgel, a meat cleaver, a chainsaw, a saucepan over the head, the flex from a mobile phone charger, a cluster bomb, a bin liner, rat poison, chloroform, an asp, a blunderbuss, a sawn-off pump-action shotgun, etc., etc. And they go on and they go on. They talk about biological weapons. They talk about really bizarre ones, like filling somebody's mouth and nose with cheese. So it's this like crazy moment. And it goes on and on with this stuff. And it's very, very striking. So again, we've built this whole massive amount of tension over the course of the play. And the waiter, we know that the waiter has something to do with whatever Paige has planning, but we don't know. It's one of those like infuriating sort of tickles in the mind where you know that something is going to happen, but you're not sure what. You think, I suspect, at least, this is the thing that I thought, even though I've read this play before. This was the thing that I sort of felt must be the case, that the waiter was there either to kill Lars or to kill all of the guests of the party in some way. The signs just point that direction, and that's one of the things that's brilliant about it. And actually, almost at the end of the play ends on page 100. On page 96, we have a stage direction. So the page says, waiter, I think it's time. And the stage direction says, the waiter pulls out a knife, the movement almost invisible. Before Lars is aware, it is at his throat. Shock. Silence. So we have this thing. And basically, Lars demands an explanation, and Paige says, there's intermittent dialogue in here, but I'm really just going to focus on Paige's part, which I did that before as well, the bit about the lobsters and being God. But Paige says, well, seeing as everyone's passed on coffee, I'll move straight on to my joke. There was once a woman who heard that you could get anything you desired on the internet, but this woman had everything. And when she searched her heart, she realized that all she wanted was a person's death. So she set about looking for a man who'd provide it. Days went by as she sat by her screen, and just as she was on the point of giving up, she found what she was looking for. easefuldeath.com. The man used metaphors to describe what he could provide, but to those truly seeking an executioner, his meaning was clear. He could bring death right into your home. Now there was only one person the woman knew who truly deserved such a top-drawer death. This person yearned for peace, for freedom, for passion. And what greater passion do we ever face than the orgasm of our own mortality? And so Lars asks, so this is your man of integrity? And Paige says yes. That was a reference to a conversation earlier on, where basically they had discussed why Paige had hired this particular waiter, and she made the argument that he was honest. He was a man of integrity, etc., etc. So Lars tries to bargain with the waiter. He tries to offer double or even quadruple the amount of money that Paige is paying. And Paige says, oh, Lars, don't disappoint me. I was hoping for inspiration. Because what does one say at the moment of one's death? I've been trying to imagine it for weeks. One could try and lamely wheedle out of it. I suppose one could scream and run, or stand and sing, Basie style, ending all on a piercing shrill. And then the stage directions say, Page gestures to the waiter. He lowers the knife. Or one could embrace the silence that's to come. Lars says, you are, and Page says, cleave the dark. Do it now and say nothing. And the stage directions say, the waiter comes for Page. She puts her arms around him. He stabs her. He helps her to the ground. The waiter says, shh. As Page dies, he puts his hand on her forehead with the compassion and authority of a priest. He closes her eyes. Lars drops to his knees. The waiter stands. He pulls a handkerchief from his pocket and wipes the knife. He places it neatly on the table. The waiter removes the envelope of money from his pocket. Lars says, who are you? The waiter takes 2 banknotes from the top of the pile. He says, my service is free. I take only the wage of a waiter. The waiter places the rest of the money on the table. He bows to the stricken guests. He leaves. Silence. Blackout. Whoa! What an ending! Oh! Like, that idea. Like, there's so much buildup of just this hatred Page seems to have for Lars. And then the waiter puts the knife to Lars's throat. You say, I saw it. I knew it. I didn't know that I knew it, but I knew it. Then, oh, this reversal. When Page says, I wanted to know what a person says in the moment of their death. And we think that she's talking about Lars here because his philosophy has to do with death doesn't matter. Like, embrace your desires and pursue them regardless of anything. Death is unimportant. Death isn't even something to be worried about. Again, it's a sort of nihilistic philosophy. So we assume that when she says that, she wanted to know if he would be true to his philosophy in his final moments. She wanted to know if she would be true to this philosophy in her final moments. And then the waiter, oh my God, what a final moment. My service is free. I'm smiling because I think it's so brilliant. But that line, my service is free. I take only the wage of a waiter. Wow, what a great line. That's like I don't know, that's like Tarantino at his best kind of thing. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why I like it so much. But I think it's one of the most brilliant endings to a play.